Live from deep in an underground bunker in East Tennessee, this is America's premier mortgage field services expert, Paul Williams.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to welcome you back to another edition of Foreclosurepedia Podcast. Foreclosurepedia Podcast is a presentation of the Foreclosurepedia Radio Network, which premieres weekly. You know, as I come to you today, and incidentally it's the 9th of May 2015, the time is 1500 hours Eastern Daylight Time. As I come to you today, I've been going over a tremendous amount of paperwork. There's a lot on people's minds right now, both management and labor. With specificity to labor, we all know front and center precisely what is going on. We know what is going on with the National Association of Mortgage Field Services. We know for a fact that Eric Miller, the executive director of the NAMFS regime, Eric Miller, whom is paid over $120,000 per year. It's above that now. We just simply do not have the paperwork yet to show. As everybody recalls, last year and into this year, Foreclosurepedia actually had to file an IRS, an Internal Revenue Service 13909 complaint to compel Eric Miller and the board of directors of NAMFS to turn over that which the law requires. Specifically, that is their income tax form 990. Early on, many people had speculated why perhaps Miller and more specifically Adriana Farelo-Fernandez, whom is the vice president of NAMFS. Early on, a lot of people speculated left and right as to why Miller and Farelo-Fernandez did not want to turn over that documentation. Foreclosurepedia stated that it would document the succinct fact that NAMFS was hemorrhaging money. It wasn't hemorrhaging nickels and dimes. It was hemorrhaging hundreds of thousands of dollars. And that, in fact, turned out to be precisely the case in point. So, we do know that in fiscal year 2013, NAMFS paid Eric Miller $120,000 salary plus. They compensated him with per diem, travel expenses, the ability to fly to and fro all across America. Miller's salary, we know for a fact, consumes well over 70% of all member dues. There is no other nonprofit organization within the United States of America that I know of wherein an executive director's salary, just their salary, consumes over 70% of all member dues. Why? Because of the fact that the IRS does not allow that. A nonprofit organization, which I submit that I do not even believe NAMFS is legitimately a nonprofit organization. They do not have a letter of determination from the IRS. They currently still are under investigation by the Internal Revenue Service vis-a-vis the 13909 complaint. And we will have to file another 13909 complaint this year. Now, in addition, we had to file a complaint with the state of Ohio. NAMFS has what is known as the NAMFS Academy. As many of you know, NAMFS has this education program. And so I want to be clear on this. The program in and of itself, I think, is probably a pretty good program. All right, and I base this upon the fact that Mr. Miller and I spoke and we met at the Florida Fast Conference last year. He presented it. So it looked fairly professional. Now, we also know that that program was stolen and or based upon Rob Preston's. Rob is the former education guru over at NAMFS. He was contracted by NAMFS to create the education program, and when he submitted all the information, NAMFS, in essence, in a nutshell, said, fuck you. They stole it, and they rolled it out as their own. Bankrupted him. But, with that said, the NAMFS Academy in the state of Ohio, those documents and those records are to be made public, and they are not. We have an official and a formal complaint in with both the Secretary of State of Ohio, and the Treasurer. We will have that information soon, but we also know that NAMFS the NAMFS Academy, its education program, is in such dire straits that it has been on a perpetual 30% plus discount for years now. In fact, the number is about less than 10% of NAMFS members have even taken the course. Why? Because they know it's bullshit. They know it's bullshit because there is no requirement today to have any certification in this industry. I want to quantify that statement for just a moment, and then we'll move on to the segue and recapitulate and go forward with what we're going to talk about in the podcast today, which is fraud. It's always fraud with NAMFS. For a long time, National Association of Mortgage Field Services had utilized one of their members, Aim Your Way. And Aim Your Way had a requirement, if you wanted to work for them, that you had to have completed some of the NAMFS education training. So in this capacity and in this direct relationship, I am of the opinion, I'm not a lawyer nor giving legal advice, but I am of the opinion that NAMFS was participating in a for-profit endeavor by and through its relationship with Aim Your Way, and the requirement, the illegal requirement, that independent contractors had to submit specifically to NAMFS education material. But the reason that we're actually coming to you on a Saturday, and as you all know, so Sundays, we always have our roundtable discussion, the Firewire discussions. We're going to have those tomorrow. We have quite a few people who actually be guests on our program. It's I think a lot of you do listen to me live. I appreciate that. I appreciate your support of the Foreclosurepedia Radio Network, and we actually stream live here on FM and AM in the Knoxville, Tennessee area, and then we simulcast throughout the internet globally. But we are here today to talk about the straw that broke the camel's back. And that straw was C's. So you have Tom and Mark Newkirk. Tom is the father, Mark is the son. And you have Robert Kapeluk. Now I call Rob English Bob because of the fact that English Bob is from England. Because of the fact that in a Clint Eastwood movie called Unforgiven, Gene Hackman kicks the living fuck out of English Bob for being a two-bit fuck-up. For having an ego that town could not wrap its arms around. What happened with C's, and a little bit of background here, C's, based down there in Hillsborough County, Florida, the Tampa area, C's defrauded a tremendous amount of contractors. And as a point of fact, Foreclosurepedia, as early as 2013, had liaised with Robert Bridges, whom is the former Associate General Counsel of Altisource, while Bridges was in Luxembourg. we had pointed out and documented and sent the information over to him in his official capacity as Associate General Counsel for Altisource, which is a foreign national operating on domestic sovereign United States soil. Sent him the information that his prime vendor, Altisource's prime vendor, was defrauding innocent men and women of labor, specifically United States citizens. So as early as 2013, Altisource knew there was a problem. But Seas, and I'm going to step back a moment, Seas was not the only problem. As a matter of fact, Buchek Enterprises, this is old Debbie and Dan, the old hubby and wife, whom, were legacy NAMFS members, one of the first 50 people to join up with John Ward and the crew when they were actually based down in Florida. And I'm sure many of you know the background. So when when Ward and the rest of the people realized there was some hustle to be made, so then they went ahead and spun it up out of Delaware and started jumping state to state, it seemed like to me, every other year. Now, whether that was because they were being chased or pursued, I don't know. Today, they function out of, a glamorous post office box somewhere, I presume, up in Stowe, Ohio. I don't know. Because I've never seen their office. Mr. Miller has never found it fit to give me a specific address where he goes in each day and reports to work. Because remember, he bills out 40-plus hours a week in salary. This is a Regis office type of fucking bullshit backspin. But anyway, so we had Buchek Enterprises. And we saw the fraud that went down there. Nearly $2 million. And the Bucheks, so you have Caleb. Caleb, in my opinion, is nothing more than a fucking trivial little cocksucker. His little penitentiary brother, Shane, as we all know, Shane threatened myself, my girlfriend, and my 5-year-old son, threatened to murder us and to seize our property. We tracked that down, tracked the IPs down to the router that was in the Buchek's house. The background on Shane, as we all know, Shane went and did federal time. He went and did federal time for defrauding banks, possessing fraudulent documents, was in the process of creating illegal passports. And the genesis of this comes from the mindset that the paterfamilias Dan Buchek had created. The militia mentality, the establishment of the belief that he, as a United States citizen, was somehow entitled to the rights and privileges of that citizenship, but yet was disconnected from having to obey the laws, the rules, and regulations of the law of the land. He used Amanda Buchek, which is their sister of Shane, Caleb, and Adam, and put Liberty coins into their hands, sent them down to buy some soft drinks, and that's where all hell broke loose. When we caught up with the Bucheks after numerous complaints from innocent men and women of labor, we reached out to Robert Bridges, reached out directly to Eric Miller. I want to make sure that everybody is very, that people specifically know. At each and every juncture, Eric Miller had firsthand knowledge that the individuals whom he presided over as executive director were committing fraud, and in many cases committing crimes. In my opinion, these were felonies. Talking about crossing state lines using electronic means and the furtherance of artifices and schemes. And Eric Miller did receive financial gain from each and every one of these orchestrated frauds. How? Why? Because the membership dues that these companies paid, that money was obtained through fraudulent pretenses, and Eric Miller had firsthand knowledge of that. We documented it left and right. We liaised with Brian Drain, who was their chief IT officer. We documented the fact that NFN, National Field Network, that's that's our great people up there. Cranston, Sherry Knott. Amanda Buchek was hired to come up and spin up some contracts, as I understand it, on behalf of NFN. And NFN's agreement was to turn over the labor, the actual services to be performed upon those work orders, to Buchek Enterprises. In addition, Brian Drain, and this is a quote, contributed in upwards of $100,000 of computer programming to NFN to be able to facilitate that. What happened? Sherry Knott and the crew said, fuck you, we're not paying you. We're not paying you jack shit. That caused a cascade of defaults, almost $2 million in fraud being committed against innocent men and women of labor, all the way down into Florida and impacting even some of the other legacy members, such as Swenson Construction. They tanked. And Adam and his wife, Amanda, not to be confused with the sister, have now been down in the Atlanta area working with Beers Housing. Beers Housing. I want everybody to remember that name because over the next couple of weeks, we're going to launch Operation Beers or hashtag OpBeers. So, Altisource did absolutely nothing. Eric Miller did nothing. In fact, he insured. He and Adriana Farelo-Fernandez, whom is the purveyor of the Farelo Group down there with the cocaine cowboys in the Miami-Dade area. Make no mistake about that. That is the area where we have an enormous area of trafficking in cocaine and money laundering. Whether Farelo-Fernandez is doing that or not, I don't know yet. So that wasn't enough. So then we had Heather Berghorst. National Association Mortgage Field Services, specifically Eric Miller, specifically Deanna Alfredo, the former president of NAMFS, specifically Adam Miles, the current president of NAMFS, specifically every board member of NAMFS knew or should have known, if they had access to the internet, that Heather Berghorst had a prior bankruptcy. She was appointed secretary. She used and abused that position of power to both land contracts and engage labor. And what did Heather Berghorst do? Committed fraud. How do we know she committed fraud? Because now, currently, she has completed her second bankruptcy in Michigan. She has been court-ordered by a federal judge to pay restitution to firms such as Arrow Construction, whom she defrauded. Fifth Third Bank currently has willful and malicious injury charges pending against her in federal court in Michigan. And what did Eric Miller do? Nothing. In fact, Eric Miller and Adriana Farelo-Fernandez ensured that no ethics investigations could proceed. Same thing with the Bucheks. But this wasn't enough. Millions of dollars in total, when we add the interest, defrauded there. This was not enough. Jay Gazinski of Michigan Realty Solutions. Jay Gazinski, Michigan, defrauded millions of dollars. Jay's story is actually, and once again, And let's step back with Berghorst. I want to go through the whole deal there. So we reached out. Robert Bridges documented everything, showed him that this was fraud. We ensured Eric Miller had copies of everything, ensured that he knew that the pay that he received by and through his salary of NAMFS was being financed by fraud, by racketeering. What happened? Nothing. In fact, Berghorst created a company about a year prior known as Heritage Home Solutions. And then they went ahead and wound it down. They took that same company which no longer existed and submitted it to Altisource and said, you busted us once on fraud, so we need to run this company so we can make some more money. And what did Altisource do? Continued to send them work through that new company. I submitted that to Robert Bridges, former Associate General Counsel of Altisource. What did he do? Nothing. Nothing. What did Eric Miller do? Nothing. In fact, the only thing that NAMFS has done to date is attempt to threaten and intimidate me by and through the obscene use of litigation. That's right. If you're a NAMFS member, you in fact attempted to sue me not a year ago. You have infringed upon my First Amendment rights. Eric Miller has violated my civil rights. And one day, there will be a reckoning for that. One day, I will bankrupt him. I will send his nice little pretty family out onto the streets. And if necessary, they can begin to service people in public restrooms for the rest of their lives to put food on the table. Because quite frankly, my give-a-damn is broken. Jay Gazinski, Altisource provided. They were the paymaster in this cartel. Jay defrauded well over $1 million from members of labor. Jay's entrance into NAMFS is most interesting. I submitted it to Eric Miller. I ran it through the former Associate General Counsel of Altisource, Robert Bridges. In fact, Jay stated that Altisource had submitted the letter of recommendation on his behalf, and that was a lie. Liz Zayats, when contacted by Robert Bridges, now that is a backstory that one day I will tell. With that said, Altisource vehemently denies ever submitting a letter or verification on behalf of Gazinski or anybody. NAMFS states that Altisource is lying. Altisource states that NAMFS is lying. Who do you believe? It doesn't matter. Because Jay Gazinski should have never become a member of NAMFS. And in fact, Eric Miller reached out to several extremely concerned NAMFS members and stated if there ever was a problem with Gazinski, he would be removed. That never happened either. Time and time and time again, what we are seeing is that this is not simply NAMFS having some bad members. This is NAMFS. This is the executive director of NAMFS. This is the vice president of NAMFS. This is the board of directors of NAMFS ensuring an environment which is prime for fraud. Time and time again, they have refused to allow ethics investigations to commence against any of these people. We are in the tens of millions of dollars now. Tens of millions of dollars, ladies and gentlemen. But that wasn't enough, and now we're at C's. And C's is unique because finally some members of labor said, you know what? we got bad checks, and this, one check, in fact, sent to a company in South Carolina was for $10,000. It was a bad check. It has the signature of English Bob, of Robert Kapelik. Somebody there printed the check, ensured that Kapelik's signature was affixed, deposited that check into an envelope, placed U.S. postage on it, then ensured that that envelope was placed into the United States mail, and it was delivered. It was delivered. So now we're not just talking about wire fraud. We're talking about postal fraud. And this is a felony. Because in fact, Altisource had reached out to Tom and Mark Newkirk and had stated, we'll pay labor, but we're not going to pay you people your profit margin. Give us the numbers for labor. Tom Newkirk, in fact, stated, and this is a direct quote from Robert Bridges, we are not going to pay anybody if we cannot make money ourselves. They can go to hell, and we will shut our doors. Now, Tom, I can somewhat appreciate the fact that, as I well understand, Mark was dumping a tremendous amount of money into the purchase of cocaine. And I can empathize if, in fact, that is what was transpiring. And I have no doubt not to believe that. I can understand that Robert Kapelik and Mark and everybody else wanted to rehab their homes. And if you track the money, you will find it. You will find where the members of Labor's money went, because it certainly didn't go to them. Fraud, ladies and gentlemen. Fraud facilitated by Eric Miller and Adriana Farelo-Fernandez, in that they refused to allow ethics investigations to commence forthwith. In that, Eric Miller and Adriana Farelo-Fernandez allowed these NAMFS members, these offender members of the regime, to continue to function under the auspices as a NAMFS member in good standing and to display the logo. This in and of itself is a form of conspiracy. This is, in effect, reaching out and stating, look, because I have the NAMFS logo, you can trust me. We all now know today you cannot trust them. There is not a single member of NAMFS that you can trust, ever, provided that Eric Miller, the executive director, remains in power. Miller must go. Now, when you look at the National Association of Mortgage Field Services, you're looking at an organization that when they look at their bylaws, what they see is a cafeteria plan. What they think is that the bylaws are there like a buffet to be used and implemented as they see fit. Because in fact, 4 years ago, the only way that you were put onto the board of directors was through an election of the membership. Today, and even though that is how the bylaws read today, the members of NAMFS are not allowed to elect anybody. If you are a NAMFS member, you are an ignorant motherfucker. If you like to be shook down, make no mistake, I will come shake you down. I have no problems or qualms, because if you're paying Eric Miller to shake you down, fuck, I might as well get a piece of the pie, right? Because if NAMFS does it and it's okay, why not me? And you see, that is the danger. That is the danger, the quintessential danger. You cannot pick and choose when it is convenient what law you're going to obey today and what law tomorrow you're not going to obey. I live in a world that deals with reality, and I like to call this reality thinking. And herein lies the irony. So when I advocate to the men and women of labor, and when I say, and I will say now, and I will continue to say, the men and women of labor whom have been defrauded, they should find the owner's address of those companies, their home address. They should reach out, if it is in a metro area, obtain the proper permits, and begin to picket those homes. I would recommend that you get banners and you get posters of starving children in Somalia and put a picture of the owner of the company that defrauded you right next to it. That is called propaganda. And propaganda is very effective, especially in a presidential election cycle. Joseph Goebbels, make no mistake whatsoever, while he was a Nazi, he knew precisely what propaganda was and how it worked. I would recommend that you find the religious institution of the firm that the owner of the firm where they attend. I would get the proper permits, and many times these permits aren't necessary because these people generally live in the suburbs and you don't have to get a permit. I'd find the religious institution and I would picket Sunday after Sunday so that the entire congregation of where that owner attends knows precisely what type of fucking slimy sack of shit is in attendance with them. I would take out newspaper ads. I would take out radio spots. I would take out television spots. And I would push and push and push until you break the motherfucker. Fuck Eric Miller. Fuck his punk bitch attorney who had the gall, the audacity to attempt to infringe upon my First Amendment rights and tell me I should not communicate that information. I will meet with Eric Miller anytime, anywhere if he wants to man up. Fuck him. Because here's the reality. While he may be able to censor people within the National Association of Mortgage Field Services, while Eric Miller laid on his fat, goddamn lazy ass while I was in the military serving, the reality of the matter is that I have rights here in America too. As does and as do the innocent men and women of labor. Ladies and gentlemen, if you do not proactively engage those rights, you will be nothing but the bitch that you are now. That is the fact of the matter. You need to actively engage the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. File complaint after complaint after complaint. You need to actively engage your district attorneys, law enforcement, your Secretary of State, because I will tell you there's only 3 companies in this entire fucking industry that has the proper licensing to perform services, to move money, to participate in commerce in states other than where they have their business license. This is the fact of the matter. There's no 2 ways around it. You know, ladies and gentlemen, it's the bottom of the hour. The time is 15:30 hours Eastern Daylight Time. The date is 9 May 2015. You're listening to Foreclosurepedia Podcast. Today's discussion is fraud, and its perpetuation by NAMFS. We're going to take a 2-minute break here and allow our sponsors to do what they do best, which helps us to do what we do best. You know, the United States always has and always will be the last great hope of the free world. Democracy. Democracy. You know, freedom made the United States probably the most productive nation in the world at the turn of the 20th century. We sent our bravest and smartest and brightest men and women around the world. We sent them to foreign soil to fight and to die, in many occasions, to defend that freedom. And one of those freedoms is at stake right now, and that is freedom of speech. The freedom to petition the government for redress of grievance. The freedom to not have criminal enterprises ruin the lives of innocent men and women. And most specifically, those innocent men and women who in this case happens to be labor here in the United States. In fact, when I look at Eric Miller and when I look at Adriana Farelo-Fernandez, I see criminal enterprise. Because there is no other way that I can rationalize in my mind why Miller and Farelo-Fernandez would refuse to allow ethics investigations to commence against those people whom specifically, by and through their fraudulent activities, not only contribute to Eric Miller's salary, but to the financing of the National Association of Mortgage Field Services. There's no way. You cannot separate the two. This is not apples and oranges. All right? You know, we are in a perfect storm today in the industry, the mortgage field services industry. 9 months ago, I predicted that the HELOC resets, that's the home equity line of credit resets, would probably end up being in the 80 percentile. And in fact, Federal Reserve's Beige Book predicts it in the upper 80 percentile. We know actually right now from Realty Track that those that are coming through the pipeline right now, 53-54% of those are right now, as we're seeing, underwater. Those are going to fail. No two ways about it. The payment reset on those, while they're saying a couple $100, I see it $400 to $500. The reason it's so critical, the reason it'll mushroom into such a serious issue is, so before those people actually flow into foreclosure, they're going to lay on their credit. So you're going to burn out those credit cards. So right now they say, 3.3 million homes. You know, I think one number I saw was, 3.6. But, let's call it 3 million. Nice round number. So you already know half of them are underwater. It's 1.5 million homes. We have about 6 to 8 quarters, and the vast majority of them will have flown into the system. During the subprime crisis, it took us, 6-7 years, and we built from, 400,000, hit about 550 in inventory, 700,000. And then, finally we moved over into the million home level, 1.2, 1.4, and we can all, say why it happened, why it didn't. We can talk about the securitization of notes and Goldman Sachs and everything till we're blue in the face. The vampire squid mentality. None of that matters. What I'm saying is that was a 6 to 7 year process. In the next 2 years, we're going to go from 400,000 to well over 1 million homes in the pipeline. But what's even more important than that, let's just say there's 2 people in those houses, in each household, and there's more, but 2. 1.5 times 2 gives us 3 million human beings without housing. Period. We do not have the MDUs. There's multiple dwelling units out there. Housing starts are in the shitter. Fuck Obama. Fuck the administration. And fuck any 2-bit banker in California you're talking to who's telling you otherwise. Grandma's basement. Yeah. Grandma's basement that's covered in mold. And Eric Miller and Adriana Farelo-Fernandez and everybody else is holding hands singing Kumbaya. No, fuck that. Because Grandma's basement is either condemned or it's at capacity. So those homes coming through the pipeline, they got to fucking flip and they got to move quickly. And I tell you something this industry doesn't need. This industry does not need the continuation of the nefarious activities which have been ongoing under the watchful eye and the tacit complicity of Eric Miller and Adriana Farelo-Fernandez. Period. End of conversation. So, and to clarify, Miller is a white man. He kind of looks white. I don't really know what the fuck he is, but he looks white to me. Farelo-Fernandez, she's Latina. So this isn't a racial deal. So we have whites and we have Mexicans here. We have male and we have female. This is an issue about environmentally, what is the mindset of these people on that board of directors? We're going to have a lot of trouble. And I'm going to tell you something, and many of you received my newsletter on this. I'm coming to Nolans, and I'm coming down there with a crew of people. And these are not the people, the men and women of labor. I haven't found too many people, even those, I think now I have 127 people, clients that I consult to. 121 of those are NAMFS members, and that's a salient fact. Now, whether it's I went in and did computer work or migrated them over through diversification and federal contract, doesn't fucking matter. I have not met one of those whom has ever, or I would feel comfortable participating with in any type of demonstrations. Now, I started my demonstrations way back in the day with an outfit called Earth First. And I went from there and migrated up, and so I participated in the 99 WTO protests in Seattle. And I honed my art in the Occupy Wall Street movement. You know, so whether we want to call it the anarcho-panda, wherein so the panda bear had to be arrested by the police, which created just insane amounts of PR you couldn't buy, or whether it deals with how do you properly don a gas mask under, tear gas attack, it doesn't matter. What does matter is the fact that I have a very unique set of skills that I've honed to an art over decades. And these skill sets are going to be applied in September against the National Association of Mortgage Field Services and those people whom come down there to sponsor them. Picketing is legal. Nothing you can do about it. It is my right. It is every American's right to assemble under the First Amendment. We have the right, freedom of assembly. We have the right, freedom of speech. And in the same way that Heather Berghorst attempted to sue me for federal racketeering, and I told her little punk bitch lawyer, I have no respect for lawyers, none. I haven't met a lawyer yet. Intimidates me. None of them. I have marginal respect for the law. Law enforcement I have respect for. Why? Because we live in a civil society. But when members of a civil society no longer respect the law itself, then how can they justifiably step forward and say, but we want the protection of this same law that we, flippantly, cast aside? You can't. You can't. So in Orleans Parish, it's a process to get the permits. We will have those permits. And the people that I work with and I associate with, yes, these are members of the Black Flag community, the anarchists. I rub shoulders with Anonymous. I rub shoulders with many of the people on MoveOn.org and others down in the Lake Pontchartrain area, wherein after Katrina, we saw a horrific level of gentrification. And many of these people are upset. They're more upset at the men and women who come in to change their locks than they are against the banks, because the financial institutions are abstract. These are people that they never interact with and they're never going to fucking see. They're safely ensconced on the 103rd floor at the Rockefeller Tower or Sears Tower, wherever they may be. But you people out there changing the locks, and you people gathering en masse to continue that perpetuation, they have anger towards you. They have enmity towards you. And asking those people to carry banners around, not a problem. And as opposed to the WTO convention, wherein large and copious amounts of military intelligence and law enforcement apparati were able to be brought en masse to protect, to insulate, and to isolate those powerful people, NAMFS has no power. NAMFS has no power. I am a classic case in point. Eric Miller wakes up at 3:08 a.m. with his asshole puckered up so fucking tight you can't get a stick pin through it. And as he wipes that cold bead of sweat away and looks onto the internet to see what's on Foreclosurepedia, make no mistake, I have his IP address. I know anybody and everybody who comes to my website. I know your IP address, which then gives me what browser you're using, which then gives me what operating system you're using. It tells me if you have a smartphone, a tablet, a desktop, a laptop, and I can pinpoint your precise fucking location to within inches. I know your patterns, I know your search habits. Because it attaches a cookie to you, I can follow you throughout the internet. And it's legal. It's legal. I know what porn you watch. I know what proclivities you have. I know your political leanings. I know how much time you spend on a website, what website you visit, what you read. And those neat little cards you go to the supermarket with, yeah. You see, all that data is sold to third-party advertisers. And when you take that data, and the data I'm able to compile, buying through the linkage of the cookie to the electronic serial number, it creates a dossier on you. It creates a profile. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. I dictate the time. I dictate the place. I control, not NAMFS, not its membership. In fact, when they backed Brett Douglas into the corner down here at the last leadership summit, and by all accounts, the way I would perceive it, threatened him in an attempt to get him to renounce his friendship with me, that kicked it up a notch for me. If you're going to come after my friends, if you're going to threaten and intimidate the people that I associate with, you get a problem with me. Unlike you, though, I won't back you into a corner and pretend I'm macho. No. I am much like brainstem ganglioma in a prepubescent child. I am inoperable and incurable. That's the deal, and that's what all of you who hear me today, you know this. You know I'm not going anywhere. You know there's no price. I'm not going to sell Foreclosurepedia. You know I don't shake down anybody. Hell, if I shook down people for fucking money, believe me, I wouldn't live in 122 square feet while attempting to convert a barn into a house. You know I live in a significantly rural area in a county with one stoplight, so you know you can't penetrate into the vale where I live. You know that as an outsider, we will smell you before you ever hit the county line. This is deliverance down here, people. Burt Reynolds and his buddy who squealed like a pig. That's where I live. This is the real world. This is reality. In fact, the true irony, the genesis of Foreclosurepedia was over $82. $82. And reflecting back now, I'm sure that Eric Miller would have rathered CWIS and AMS had simply paid me instead of creating problems. So I'm going to come down and pick it because that's my legal right. I'm going to continue to, and I'm going to ratchet up the rhetoric that I speak and that I write and that I communicate. Why? Because that's my right. It's my opinion. Much like cancer, I am evolving. And you know for a fact, because now I'm inside of your minds. You see, therein lies the crux. What do you do? Now, there may be some of you out there, and I do highly recommend this, for those of you whom are guilty for crimes against the innocent men and women of labor, I encourage you to commit suicide. I do. I think that you would do the world a great service. I think it would free up a tremendous amount of oxygen. And I'm a proponent of oxygen for people here on earth. I don't really think the world's going to miss you. You know, so I advocate if you'd be willing to commit suicide, hey, when it happens, hey, before you do it, simply send a letter to me. I'll publish your photo for you, man. You'll live on. Live on through the internet, baby. Because I have no love for you. I give no more thought to your committing suicide than I do passing salt at the dinner table. For those of you who think that Eric Miller and Adriana Farelo-Fernandez, that they got your back, that y'all are down like two flat tires, that you're going to roll the Daytons off, I got news for you. You're not going to. You're not going to. Because even when, and even with, the reported levels of fraud down by 92% year to year. There's an ironic number because Altisource's revenue was down 91% year to year for Q1 fiscal year 2015. But I have news for all of you. That even when the fraud ends, and it's going to end, that I'm going to continue to pursue. It is my life's mission to bring you people to justice. Unless and until Eric Miller is removed, unless and until Adriana Farelo-Fernandez goes back to tending to her little kid she just had. And there's an interesting timeline. So at the same point in time that Farelo-Fernandez and Miller showed up at FAST last year, almost to the day was the birth of the child. Farelo-Fernandez in a dress, Miller, nice slacks. The minute that the conference was over, here at the Holiday Inn right next door, myself and several others rolled over because we are labor. We rolled over to get a couple of cases of beer. Within minutes, Farelo-Fernandez in her tight jeans, Miller in his shorts, both of them sharing a car, departing. Ironic, because Farelo-Fernandez is from the Miami-Dade area. Miller had flown in from Ohio. So I don't know. And I would gladly ask them the question, but neither will respond to an email. It's almost like Nabil El-Gadari over at MSI. Good old Nabal, so I called MSI because I backtracked Nabal back to Hillsborough County. There it is again, Florida. Seems in 2003, there is a domestic violence. Photo looks the same. Addresses are the same. Back then, he filed a motion to proceed in forma pauperis. That's Latin for in the form of a pauper. So he had no money. Fucked up some woman. I presume it's a woman because of I don't know. Maybe he is sucking some dude's dick. I don't know. And slapped the dick too hard. You'd have to ask him. I reached out to MSI to ask because I was concerned. Because with domestic violence, I take that very seriously. Because a lot of the contractors in this industry are female. And these are female-owned businesses. And is it wise to have the vice president of operations at MSI overseeing potential conflict with women, and you've been convicted of domestic violence? I don't know. The El-Gadari indicates to me, and as I found on the Google Plus page that tracks back to the anti-Semitic comments referencing Rihanna, stating Zionist agendas. In a world hypercharged with radical Islam, is this wise? Do we want the potential for a misogynistic, radical Islamist as a vice president of operations? Once again, yet another National Association of Mortgage Field Services regime member. I reached out to MSI for comment, verification, or statement. These are not one and the same. There was none forthcoming. In fact, they called me the next day. I was trying to obtain a glass of water out of my refrigerator. 2 rings. It hung up. I called them back. I got some pimple-faced chick, I presume pimple-faced, because she had a high-pitched nasal whine. Told her who I was. Her firm had just called me. We'll get right back with you. Well, folks, it's the 9th of May. Time is 16:07 hours. Didn't get back with me. How about Melissa Shankin up there at Five Brothers, huh? Good old Melissa. Yeah, here is the demonstration of what the financial institutions ought to be terrified about. Drug trafficking. Yeah, our good friend Melissa Shankin possessing grams of cocaine, convicted, multiple civil judgments, tax liens, one civil judgment, in fact, for not paying a bill to the funeral home. What is she in charge of? Operations. Where? Five Brothers. And that gives me the segue over into the Five Brothers deal. As you all know, this week I will be releasing the now sealed Qui Tam. So this was filed under seal pursuant to 31 United States Code Section 3730. It's the United States of America, ex-rel, and the relator versus Five Brothers Mortgage Company Services and Securing Incorporated Five Brothers Mortgage Services and Securing Incorporated, Five Brothers Lawn Care LLC, Five Brothers Leasing Incorporated, Five Brothers Realty Incorporated, Forerunner Specialty Default Services Incorporated, Joseph Badalamenti, U.S. Bank N.A., and U.S. Bank Corp. as defendants. And we're going to talk about that here. It's the top of the hour. I'll give 2 minutes over to my sponsors. I appreciate my sponsors. I want to say this before we roll with them. These men and women, these are people whom have identified the fact that what they're investing in when they support advertising on the Foreclosurepedia Podcast, on the Foreclosurepedia Radio Network, is they are investing in a semi-level landscape within the mortgage field services industry. They know that. I know that. America knows that. So while I have some clients whom I have done business with in the past, I have done interviews with them, and they have come and begged for those interviews to be taken down. One client, actually, I interviewed because in Altisource, this is what I love about this industry. Altisource told him that he can no longer associate with me, and he will lose his contracts if that information is not taken off my website. So my civil rights are violated because a foreign national does not want a legally obtained interview to be aired. I mean, this is Nazi Germany, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to catch you at the top of the hour. We're going to roll on this. We're going to actually talk in depth about this sealed QUITAM. And ladies and gentlemen, you're going to be blown away because the starting number in damages is $100 million. We'll be right back after this. Thank you. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. As usual, you may reach me on Google Plus at D. Paul Williams, LinkedIn, Paul Williams, and the LinkedIn group Property Preservation Consortium, Twitter, Foreclosurepedia. We stream all our podcasts on iTunes, Foreclosurepedia. We have our screencasts over on YouTube, the Foreclosurepedia channel, and always at foreclosurepedia.org. We'd like to give a special shout out to Amazon.com, whom provides our S3 podcast and video storage, and Cloudflare for hosting Foreclosurepedia in 24 different geo-positioned servers, pro bono as well. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, feel free to give me a shout out, COO at foreclosurepedia.org.